Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you very much for joining us this evening. I wanted to welcome you all on behalf of the Waterloo Region Crime Prevention Council. My name is Deb Berge, and I'd like to start off by acknowledging the land that we are on. The Waterloo Region Crime Prevention Council exists and operates on the Haldimand Tract, the land that was promised to the Haudenosaunee of the Six Nations of the Grand River, and is the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee people. We acknowledge that historic and current colonization practices continue to disproportionately affect Indigenous peoples throughout Turtle Island. Given that the focus of Waterloo Region Crime Prevention Council is preventing harm to individuals, it's very important to understand that Indigenous peoples are particularly harmed in this way by our colonial systems. The recent news out of Kamloops is sadly only one incident in a long history of harms. We're very grateful for the generous involvement of everyone involved in the Upstream speaker series. We sincerely hope that these events inspire equity-based improvements in all of our communities' safety and well-being. So to start off this evening, I'd like to thank our panelists for bringing their expertise to this important conversation. I thank all of you for taking the time to come and engage in this conversation. You may have heard of upstream thinking. We're hoping that this panel will provide you with greater understanding. In the past months, as Crime Prevention Council has been revisiting their mission commitments, or their vision commitments and strategic directions, we've been having conversations about an upstream approach to our systemic barriers in society. We've learned so much together. It's been really important for us to have these conversations as council, but to bring this conversation to the broader community. So as you may know, this is the fourth and final event of a four event long series. So we're happy to kind of have this as the final event. A little bit about the format tonight. We can't see you, you can see us. So your cameras are not visible to us. The chat has been disabled. However, you are able to submit questions through the question and answer feature. The questions will not be visible to other attendees, only to the panelists, until we've selected that question to answer it publicly. So once we select that, then it will be visible to others. You can submit questions anonymously as well if you choose. The session is being recorded and will later be posted on the website along with all of the sessions from our series. So what we want to do now is just, there you go, Julie's right on it. Thank you to the back end team. We have a poll here. We just want to know a little bit about who's in the audience. So please go ahead, fill out that poll. Your answers are anonymous, so people won't see who's responded. All right, we had most people respond there. So you should all be able to see the results now. So it's been interesting for us with this series. We've been really pleased to see that we've had folks from, certainly a majority of folks from within Waterloo Region, but we've certainly had a few from within Ontario, outside of Waterloo, certainly some from across Canada and in the US. So nice to kind of see that broad representation. So welcome everybody. And then just a little bit of a curiosity about what's your knowledge of upstream prevention. So we've got definitely a number of people who are very knowledgeable. So hopefully you'll still pick something up from tonight's conversation. And seems like the majority know a little bit about upstream prevention. And then one person out there, happy to see, knows nothing. So that means you've got a lot to learn. So that's great. So hopefully we'll definitely add to your conversation, add your understanding of upstream thinking tonight. I'm really looking forward to the panelists and what they'll bring to this. However, I am going to start off our session this evening with a bit of an overview of upstream thinking to ensure that we do all have a common understanding. Upstream prevention terminology seems to be fairly commonly referenced these days, and the Crime Prevention Council has done a lot of thinking and research into this. So we're going to sort of present what the Waterloo Region Crime Prevention Council's view of upstream thinking is. I'm not an expert in this field, but I've been happy to sort of pull together some of this information that Crime Prevention Council has created over the years. And then the panelists will absolutely add much more depth to your understanding as we go along. So Waterloo Region Crime Prevention Council for many years has focused on identifying and offsetting root causes of crime. We're moving that language now to focusing on harm, the systemic drivers that cause that harm, addressing the harm before it occurs, and focusing on equity. And the language is very intentional there, in that the language of crime tends to situate within the individual, versus the term harm tends to be more about the structures and the systems that cause harm. So moving kind of from focus on the individual to more of those preventative issues in the systems and structures. So when we talk about harm, what we mean is harm encompasses social, economic, psychological, environmental injury or damage inflicted on individuals, community, society, either intentionally or unintentionally. So just some background information. A little bit ago fairly recently, a report was released that again sort of talks about that the inequities are not about individual choice or random occurrence, but they really are the result of that historic and ongoing interplay of inequitable structures, policies, norms. So again, it's sort of taking the focus away from an individual to those deeper systemic kind of factors. So this is the vision that the Waterloo Region Crime Prevention Council has recently adopted. We envision a safe, equitable, and just community where everyone has access to opportunities to thrive. The council consists of 40 members who represent, approximately 40 members, who represent a broad range of service sectors and populations within the community. So right now we have a video that Julie's going to bring up for us. And this video will just show you a little bit of a story that will hopefully, again, help you understand the concept of moving kind of further upstream to prevention.
We tend to look at crime by focusing on individuals and their failings. When we ignore the many factors that shape people's attitudes, choices, and actions, we limit our ability to prevent crime from happening in the first place. A broad understanding of why crime happens brings prevention into focus. People's actions don't happen in isolation. Our environment plays a key role in how we behave. Early life experiences, the health of the community, opportunities for recreation, employment, social norms, as well as income and housing are just some of the factors that are connected to crime. By shifting upstream and getting closer to the source of the problem, we improve many more lives than by just focusing on the individual. Upstream prevention means we create an environment in which all people have a range of opportunities to grow, to learn, to work, to play, to connect, and to love and be loved. By working upstream, we increase the chances that everyone can reach their potential. This, in turn, goes a long way in reducing crime. A lot more upstream prevention leads to better long-term results and decreases the need for reactive measures. Creating an environment in which everyone can reach their potential is possible, and we all have a role to play. So let's make prevention matter. Learn more at www.preventingcrime.ca.
All right, so I think that video pretty much says it all, but just to kind of summarize again some of those key elements before we move on and hear more from our panel. So certainly you heard in that about kind of going upstream into those structures in that video. And as I was mentioning earlier, kind of shifting the focus from individuals to those structures. So kind of as you shift from downstream to further upstream, you're moving kind of from your focus of individuals to certain groups who perhaps have different issues. And then we move into the community, neighborhood focus, population level, and then finally up into those sort of structures. This isn't necessarily a linear progression. You can find with many interventions, you may have different elements of your intervention that move across that continuum, but essentially that's just to give you a bit of an idea of where the focus shifts as you go through that lens. And I think importantly is the foundations for community well-being, address those foundations. So we have equity, accountability, fair economic systems, social norms, anti-racism efforts, community engagement, and compassion. And then ultimately what we're trying to achieve, of course, is community safety, academic success, food security, belonging, and other kind of elements. So one of the things that Waterloo Region Crime Prevention Council has done is sort of taken a number of definitions out there and kind of pulled them together to kind of create our own understanding of downstream, midstream, upstream, and what it looks like to be working at each level. So we've had a working group of our council that's come up with these, and we pulled from a number of different sources. So from a downstream point of view, depending on your framework, some of you may be in different academic circles or different practices. You may hear downstream called tertiary or indicated interventions. But really, again, it's focusing on that individual level, a specific service level, kind of more immediate needs. Midstream is sometimes equated, you might be familiar with the term secondary or selective. And this tends to look at supports that are perhaps specific groups, may look at regional or local kind of micro policy level. And again, sort of focusing kind of at that level. And then finally, we have upstream, which can sometimes be equated with primary prevention or universal systems. And that again focuses on more of the structural, systemic, national or transnational kind of changes. And then upstream versus downstream. One of the aspects of the further upstream you are, when you're downstream, many interventions can look vastly different from one issue to the next. The further upstream you go, you often have the same underlying issues. So one of the advantages are that the further upstream you go into what's been coined by some on council as the deep upstream, the advantage of that initiative is that you can then impact many different downstream kind of impacts or effects. So you have a much greater impact of your intervention. So as an example, in a downstream world of food security, if you're looking at a food bank, you're addressing one element, whereas if you go upstream and look at something like basic income for all, that can affect housing, that can affect certainly can affect food security, it can affect health, it can affect a number of different things. So kind of the further upstream you go, the more impact your intervention will have because it affects multiple things in the downstream world. And then obviously overall, the outcomes we're looking for, as the video inferred, is improved safety, fair income, food security, access to quality housing, and a number of different benefits. All right, so now that we're here, we did want to take a moment and just test your knowledge a bit. And we're going to have a poll go up in a moment, not quite yet. Oh, there you go, Julie, she's quick. I want to explain the poll before you start to fill it out. So one of the things that the Crime Prevention Council has also done, in addition to taking those definitions that we've created, we're also looking to create an assessment tool to help folks, ourselves and others, assess their intervention. So where is your intervention on that level of upstream thinking? And so we've come up with a number of questions that are here in this tool that'll help kind of assess where you're at. So we came up with an example that, just to sort of play around with tonight, don't have to overthink it, you don't have to worry too much. But our example tonight is to look at how are we going to go upstream to prevent COVID. So this is kind of something that many of us are used to, and unfortunately, we're very familiar with today. And so my question to you is, how are we going to go upstream to prevent COVID? One intervention that we have right now is an intervention to stop the spread of COVID. Governments around the world are implementing mass vaccination programs. So if you look at the poll that we've got up there now, take a look at it and think of a mass vaccination program that governments are implemented and answering each question. There you go, somebody's on it. And with each one, you have two options. So pick one of the options that you think best applies to a vaccination program, the way that we are rolling them out currently with COVID. So hopefully that makes sense. So first question is it designed to help people who are already experiencing distress, pain, suffering, or harm, or is it designed to prevent people from experiencing that kind of harm in the first place? So you would pick one of those options. Question number 2, pick one of those options. Question number 3, pick one of those options. And again, thinking of that example of mass vaccination programs for COVID. So we'll give you a little bit of time because it's a bit of a lengthy poll, but this is just to kind of play and test. This tool, while you're filling that out, I'll give you some more background information. So this tool is actually being tested. We have some faculty members on our Crime Prevention Council who are actually taking this tool out and doing some reliability and validity testing on it, and actually trying to add some rigor to it as well. So we just thought we would play with it a bit with you tonight as well to help test your understanding. All right, I think I am going to end it there so that we can move along. But like I say, so you should all be able to see those poll results now. So kind of going through these questions, when we envision this, this assessment tool ultimately being released, it would actually kick out a score of what's your score overall. With the limited functionality of a poll in Zoom, we can't really do that. But what we are seeing with these individual questions is that on question number 1, most people saw this approach as being preventative. Some saw it focusing more on immediate needs than root causes. Again, sort of short-term impacts, near-term. So we're seeing a lot of that, focusing on minimizing harms, designed to address specific needs. Yeah, so a lot of immediacy, focusing on individuals. So not as many of those upstream elements in there. So I think, you know, some people we're seeing, like, there's never kind of a clear crystal here, especially with this sort of a general discussion where, you know, if we were to actually have a good debate about it, I'm sure we might come to some different conclusions, but kind of nice to just see at a glance. You know, my thinking when discussing it in advance with some of the team members is that I would say the vaccination program as well is not fully upstream for sure, because we're not necessarily at the system level, but not fully downstream. Fully downstream of COVID would be treating somebody who has COVID. Fully upstream, an example of more fully upstream could be things to look at, you know, we could be then looking at things like, I think one example was preventative vaccination programs like measles, mumps that we have in the school system, so that really sort of nips it in the bud altogether. Some other pieces are transnational and sort of international travel restrictions. So not allowing people to travel, then that kind of prevents the spread of COVID, but that's a little more restrictive, obviously, of a methodology. So there's a range of interventions to sort of prevent COVID. Probably our current vaccination program is not fully downstream or fully upstream. And I think another important thing to note is that while the vaccination program is universally available to all, it's also not, there are targeted elements of it. Given that we certainly know with COVID that certain groups have been impacted far more than others. So there are some targeted elements, which is again, kind of not fully universal. All right, so that was an interesting little exercise. I hope you found that interesting and helpful. And so moving along, basically just to sum up, upstream thinking, when we start upstream, we stop problems before they start. All right, so again, this is the 4th in a series of 3 sessions. So do feel free to go to our recordings. Probably later this week, all of our sessions will be up online. Just takes a little bit of while to edit them after the fact. So feel free to go and check out the other sessions if you haven't had a chance to see them already. And so with that, my final slide here is that if you want to continue to be involved with the Crime Prevention Council, you have an option to sign up for our Friends of Crime Prevention, and you can get more information about events such as these and our newsletters and other information. All right, so with that, I am eager to pass over the torch to our other panelists. So we are going to have 3 panelists presenting this evening. So that was meant to just be a teaser overview for you to kind of give you a bit of background information. But Lana, Alfgeir, and Janice are here with us this evening. I'll introduce them each in turn as they're each going to take some time to sort of present on their work and explain how upstream thinking has been embedded into their work. And so I will start by introducing Lana Wells. So she is an associate professor at the Brenda Stratford Chair in the Prevention of Domestic Violence at the Faculty of Social Work, University of Calgary, Alberta. Feel free to join us, Lana. There we go, Alberta, where she's leading a large-scale primary prevention initiative called SHIFT, the Project to End Domestic Violence. And I think we were going to throw a link to that. There it is. She's got it. Thank you, Abby. We've got a link to that work if you want to learn more about it in the chat there. SHIFT's mandate is to develop and support the implementation of research-based primary prevention strategies in partnership with government, academics, community, public, private, not-for-profit organization, and civil society to significantly reduce and prevent gender-based violence. Currently, Lana and her team are co-leading a number of initiatives that aim to understand the impact of COVID-19 on domestic and sexual violence and to identify and mobilize effective primary prevention approaches to stop violence before it starts. I had the pleasure of participating in a webinar a few weeks ago that Lana had presented at, and was really impressed with those structural systemic level changes that I think will really make a significant difference. So with that, I'm going to pass it over. Thank you so much.
Well, hello, everybody. As Deb mentioned, my name is Lana Wells, and I'm an associate professor and the Brenda Stratford Chair in the Prevention of Domestic Violence in the Faculty of Social Work at the University of Calgary. It's a handful. Lots of lines there. And today I get the opportunity to present on an initiative that I'm leading called SHIFT, the Project to End Domestic Violence. And I'm going to highlight some of the work we're doing where we've been focused for almost 11 years on understanding primary prevention, on how to advance it, and how to work with different systems and institutions and organizations to also incorporate and advance evidence-informed approaches. Up on the screen there, you'll see my website, which is www.preventdomesticviolence.ca. And I encourage anyone to go. We have hundreds of reports up there that talk about lots of our initiatives and some lessons learned, that some failures as well, because I like to also share those as well, because I think that's how we learn best. Before I get started, though, I'd like to start by acknowledging that I am joining you from the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta. The city of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. And I also want to acknowledge the harms, mistakes of the past, and that we're committed at SHIFT to moving forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. So as I mentioned, I've been at the university for 11 years. And when I came into the position, the Brenda Stratford Chair position is actually focused on advancing primary prevention. And I was excited about that possibility and concept because I realized that if we don't develop a complementary emphasis on primary prevention, so that is really about stopping violence before it starts, then violence and gender inequality will continue, keeping our shelters full and our police and justice systems busy. So this means that at SHIFT, our research and advocacy efforts have really been focused on moving upstream and taking action to stop violence before it starts, rather than treating or alleviating its consequences. I do come from a background of working in women's shelters and in the crisis intervention, and it was a great honor to be able to spend time and energy and research and collaboration on really trying to figure out how we can stop violence before it starts. So if we go to the next slide, Gloria Steinem and my donor, Dr. Barry Stratford, who created this position at the university, used to carry this quote around, and it states, "We are still standing on the bank of the river, rescuing people who are drowning. We've not gone to the head of the river to keep people from falling in." That is the 21st century task. And that is where we have focused all of our research and advocacy. So for us at SHIFT, when we're talking about upstream, we're really referring to primary prevention. About, when you can look on the screen, primary prevention focuses on preventing initial perpetration and victimization of domestic and sexual violence by scaling up interventions that target the structural and cultural conditions that produce and reinforce violence, discrimination, and inequities. So this means our strategies and approaches focus on the structural and cultural conditions that produce and reinforce violence. So as the video shared and as Deb talked about, really trying to understand structural and cultural issues and how we can change those to stop violence. So if you go to the next slide, we often use a visual of a iceberg. And I'm not sure if people have seen this, but it's a great, I think, visual to think about. When you look above the iceberg, so at the top, you'll see, well, we call it above the waterline, you'll see multiple forms of violence, such as verbal violence, physical violence, coercive control, sexual violence, murder, and femicide, and so forth. And so these forms of violence are generally more observable, and often our services and programs focus on addressing these types of violence. So the structural and cultural conditions that drive domestic and sexual violence, that's below the waterline, are much harder to see. So at the bottom of the iceberg, you'll see structural conditions that shape violence, injustice, and an inequitable society. Cultural conditions that drive violence are social norms. So social norms are unwritten rules that permit and reinforce structural conditions and forms and expressions of violence. So these social norms make structural conditions and expressions of violence seem normal and acceptable. So this model has been helpful in supporting our partners and stakeholders to understand that, well, of course, we want to continue to address forms and expressions of violence that we see above the waterline. Primary prevention focuses on addressing what's below the waterline, trying to change the structures and cultural conditions that drive and reinforce violence and discrimination and inequities. And that's where we've been focusing our work. If you go to the next slide, it's on the social ecological model, which was shared earlier as well in Deb's presentation. So this is a model we use as well to help our partners understand where we're focusing our interventions and time. So we talk about going upstream and focus on the structural and cultural conditions that drive domestic and sexual violence. So we need to turn our attention to community, neighborhood, and societal factors, right? Of what's creating risk of experiencing and using violence, and also to advance the factors that buffer against those risks at these levels. So that's where we have to focus on systems, structural, and culture change is critical to stopping violence before it starts. So between the iceberg model and this model, I think it starts to help explain the focus of primary prevention and the importance of it. And so for us at Shift, if you go to the next slide, it really means applying a multi-sectoral and systems approach to primary prevention. So we've spent a lot of time targeting specific populations, which we call changing minds, and trying to work on changing minds, while at the same time, we're targeting the structures and institutions around those people that reinforce violence and discrimination, which we call changing contexts. And we've done this work through partnerships and collaborations with different systems and groups and organizations. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Our approach in our work, especially in the last 7 years, has really been about building strategies from co-design principles, along with focusing on early adopters and working where there's already momentum, leadership, and implementation supports. And so I'm going to dig in now to our current priorities. And I'm going to start with 2 slides down, please, how we're advancing and give you some examples of what we mean. So right now, we're building an Alberta primary prevention framework, and we're super excited about this initiative. The goal of the project is to build a policy framework that targets governments, systems, institutions, private corporations, human service organizations, and of course, the public, to implement approaches that address the root causes of violence, to stop violence before it starts. We're super excited about this initiative. It started a year ago. And if you go to the next slide, I'll talk about some of the partners that are involved. So we've partnered with a group of people. We've partnered with the government of Alberta. And so this will become a policy framework that will support and direct their investments in this area. It'll also look at their own pieces of legislation and policy that can reinforce or pro-social behaviors or stop violence. We also partner with a group called Impact. They're an organization that represents about almost 400 organizations now and systems in Alberta that focus on domestic and sexual violence, and they're a collective impact group. And then we've also partnered with some Indigenous leaders and researchers, as well as through Impact, they're partnering with organizations that work and support Indigenous peoples. And so we're very excited about this approach because bringing all these partners together, we call it a four-legged chair now, that we're going to be able to design and engage both community and systems and government to first talk about and be able to identify what structural and cultural issues are getting in the way, but also to identify strategies and solutions. And so we're super excited about that project, and we'll have a primary prevention framework for government, for impact, and then with Indigenous populations and communities. And then together, we're trying to focus also racialized communities within this work. And so at the end of the day, I'm not sure if the Waterloo Crime Prevention Council has been engaged in working with government and designing policy frameworks, but I think it's a key area to think about how investments and policies and legislations are made and what we can inform and influence to go upstream. The other project I want to talk about today, if you go to the next slide, is called Data to Action. And we're trying to leverage new technologies to predict and prevent domestic and sexual violence. I like to talk about, as a social worker, I feel like I missed the technology revolution. I feel I'm 40 years behind. And when COVID hit, it became clear that we needed to obviously adapt to virtual interventions, but also we've not been using data from open source data in ways that private companies have been using it. So we brought together a group called HelpSeeker, which is a B Corp tech company, as well as Impact, that group that represents 300-400 organizations in Alberta. And together we agreed that we wanted to create a dashboard of data, of real-time data. So we're looking at both open source data, so that's through Google Analytics, but we're also, the organizations who are part of Impact are sharing their data. So we're going to be able to better understand what's actually happening day to day. And so we'll have up-to-date information so we can better map and understand, but also there's some artificial intelligence built into this technology so we can actually start to predict and better understand domestic and sexual violence in Alberta. We're super excited about this project because we're actually engaged with data scientists to use data to make better decisions. And so if you go to the next slide, you'll see these are the 3 key partners. And if you haven't heard of HelpSeeker, I'd encourage you to Google it. They actually got funding to go across Canada to not only provide access for people looking for services, but also to help with this mapping the systems across Canada. So we're super excited. We're going to be doing systems mapping. We're going to be doing research off the data that's coming in. And we're going to finally be able to use big data to help influence our sector. The next slide is just a quick data dashboard it's just a snapshot of our data dashboard. So there's no specific data in here, but this is the stuff we're going to start to see, and you're going to see it regionally from all different regions in Alberta. So if you live in a particular community, you'll be able to access this real-time data. What's exciting, we have police involved, health involved, child welfare, all different kinds of systems have come to the table. Better data, better prevention efforts. So if we go to the next slide, this next project that we've been involved in is called the Art of the Nudge approach. And we spent 3 years from 2017 to 2020 working with 14 community agencies and governments to design an approach that we're calling changing context. And as I shared before, a lot of our sector's work has been on changing individuals and doing behavioral change at the individual level. We really wanted to understand how can we change the context as well as individuals to support the behavior change. And so we spent 3 years working in male-dominated environments to better understand how to surface culture and norms. And we designed an approach called Changing Context that's based on social norms and a nudge approach. And right now we're piloting it in with the Calgary Police, which we're super excited. We've just finished year 1. We're going to be there for another 2 years. So we're working with surfacing culture, surfacing norms, and then working on strategies through nudge approaches to identify ways to change, to advance equity and inclusion. And if you go to the next slide, and this project really is about mobilizing men for allyship and change, but our overall goal is to increase gender equity, inclusion, and belonging internally within the Calgary Police Service by building capacity. So we're trying to build gender intelligence and social norms and realize, because often we are influenced by those around us more than even in our own values and beliefs. Then we're doing a nudge design, which we're designing hundreds of nudges that different individuals and members in the service are taking up and implementing to reduce. Well, we want to first increase more gender diversity within the police force. We also want to stop sexual harassment and misconduct. And those are the 2 areas that we're focused on. We're super excited about this approach, and we think that it'll add to our behavioral toolbox on how to stop violence before it starts. I have 2 other quick projects I'll go through. If you can go to the next slide, we have one called Connect Ed, which is really around engaging parents and caregivers to prevent adolescent dating violence. we know there's a causal relationship. If you experience dating violence when in your adolescence, when you move on, it's a higher risk that you'll move into domestic violence relationships in adulthood. So we know it's a key area to prevent and reduce violence. So we've focused on teen dating violence for the last 8 years, but more importantly, recently, we've really started to focus on the parent and caregivers using technology to nudge and support parents to better support their adolescents. And we're taking, what's exciting about this initiative is we're working with informal supporters within communities to train and support them to work with the parents within their communities. And we're going to be using technology as well. And we're super excited about testing this approach. The last one I want to talk about is called advancing. If you go to number 5, please. Yep. It's called Advancing Transformative and Reparative Approaches to Prevent Sexual Violence Outside of the Justice System. So we know victims of sexual violence do not receive good care in the justice system. And we've done a case that's up on the slide to create an alternative approach that's outside the justice system that victims can seek within their own communities around transformative and reparative approaches. And this is really around healing, reparation, and restitution. And we're just starting this initiative. The Canadian Women's Foundation has funded this. We're super excited, and we'll be working with people across Canada to create a framework to do this kind of work. So I think we'll just skip to the last slide because of time. I'm happy to take any questions when it comes to it, but I wanted to mention that all of our initiatives are trying to focus on systems, institutions, policies, and legislation now to help create the conditions to support pro-social and healthy behavior. And happy to take any questions. And I really do encourage you to go up to our website to get more information.
Lana, thank you so much. Yeah, there's an absolute wealth of information up on that website. And I suspect if there's any that are interested locally in having further conversations, as a follow-up to this, we may or may not be reaching out to Lana to have some follow-up discussions locally, because I think there's an awful lot of information there that we can definitely leverage and take advantage of. So thank you so much. So as a reminder, you can put questions in the Q&A. We will probably get through all 3 speakers first and then have a brief break, and then come back and take those questions. So, excellent. Well, next up, I'm happy to introduce somebody who might be familiar to some of you, Dr. Alfgeir Kristjansson. He is an associate professor of public health at West Virginia University in the School of Public Health, where he also serves as the director of the school's PhD program. He earned his PhD in social medicine from the Karolinska Institute in Sweden. Did I get that? In 2010, and was a postdoctoral fellow at Columbia University in New York City between 2010 and 2012. The central focus of his work is on the health, behavioral development, and well-being of children and youth, with particular attention to substance use prevention and community health promotion. So many here on the call may know it as the Iceland model, and we've had the pleasure of having you in Waterloo Region in the past. A little bit more about that. So you are the principal investigator, Alfgeir is the principal investigator of several federally funded studies, including the Young Mountaineer Health Study funded by the NIAAA and the Integrated Community Engagement Collaborative funded by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention via the West Virginia Prevention Research Center. During the last 15 years, Dr. Kristjansson has also acquired support for his research and community engagement work from the European Research Council, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, and the Health Resources and Services Administration. He's published over 90 peer-reviewed manuscripts in scholarly journals with public health, health education, preventative medicine, and multidisciplinary journals focused on adolescents. So that's a pretty good mouthful, but very much looking forward to what you have to share with us tonight, Alfgeir. So thank you very much and welcome.
Thank you. I thought that was never going to end, that introduction, but thanks very much. And nice to be with you all again. I came to visit Waterloo and Kitchener, I think it was about 3 years ago, and gave a few presentations. One of them was at the brand new public library at the time, and very memorable. Great visit. And since I've actually been a number of times to different parts of Canada for similar purposes, among those 2, Calgary, in January. I remember it was very cold. I've been to a number of other places, but great to be here. And thank you so much for the invitation and for allowing me to talk a little bit about this work that, you know, really stands close to my heart. I'm a primary prevention or an upstream thinking researcher and community engagement. What should we say, professor? And I'm very interested generally in the shifting of thinking that Lana experienced and talked about in her presentation. Thank you for that introduction. You know, one of the critical issues that sort of seems to come back to us time and time and time again is that we have way more knowledge currently about health behaviors and health outcomes than we actually implement. And because implementation takes other steps, implementation takes politics and mobilizing of individual and community-based behaviors, which is much more much harder than research. So let me talk about an example of something that has actually taken place and been done quite comprehensively, or very comprehensively actually, and where we have been able to show results at a systematic level. And the example is about substance use prevention for youth or for adolescents, often dubbed the Icelandic prevention model that I've been a part of for most of my career. And just as a matter of division that we've already been through, just to kind of highlight that in line with substance use prevention, or put the focus on substance use prevention. You know, the traditional division between upstream, sometimes labeled primary prevention, is really the prevention of onset. We're trying to prevent kids from initiating drug use. And there are at least a couple of ways that is often done through. One of them is to focus not at all on drugs, and try to build and focus on stronger communities, stronger environment, stronger families, and so on, so that kids don't have any reason to initiate. Midstream, or often labeled secondary prevention, is really about behavior change after behavior has been initiated, but hasn't been or hasn't become a very serious problem, or at least not a life-threatening problem. Smoking cessation programs, for example, are very typical behavior change midstream type of approaches. And downstream prevention is really when we are trying to mitigate life-threatening circumstances. In terms of drug use, this is really the drug use treatment system, the treatment system where we are trying to help people that are in really challenging circumstances with their use. So which approach is most effective? That question, of course, is relevant, especially for implementation, because this is the question that politicians, for example, will always ask. And it really depends on the goal. Do we want to prioritize preventing drug use in the first place? Do we want to try to teach people to live with drugs in their lives? Or do we want to simply wait at the bottom of the stream and really don't do much or do nothing until treatment becomes really the only option? And the second question that many elected officials, for example, will ask is this question of, well, where are our current priorities? What are we really doing at the moment? And well, in the current systems, we prioritize downstream prevention by a lot. Over 90% of prevention funding is allocated to technical, individual, treatment-based solutions that we often refer to as tertiary care or downstream prevention. But I'd like to add to this problem, if we can designate it as such, that unfortunately we also tend to use ineffective methods to prevent or delay substance use onset. In other words, when we ask people about, well, what kind of primary prevention activities are you running here or are operated in your area? The answer will often be, well, we run instructional programs in schools, usually. And the idea behind those is that kids can cognitively grasp that drugs are bad and that they shouldn't be used because it's bad for their health and their future. These kinds of approaches, they strip away and basically remove any social contextual impact in their lives, and therefore really do not support what research has found over a long period of time, that it is not random who or which kid or teenager initiates drug use. In other words, we know plenty about what kids are most likely to initiate drug use, and it has a lot to do with their environment, and actually much more than the individuals. So in the present scenario, excuse me, let me move on here and click the right button. So the Icelandic prevention model is a holistic, community-based upstream approach. And there are two issues there that I think are important to highlight. The holistic community-based means that it doesn't focus on individuals at all. It really assumes that children and youth are products of their social environment. And this will, require a sort of a lengthier discussion about how we define individuals and so on and so forth. But basically, the assumption is that if you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck at the population level, and this is something that elected officials tend to like, you should really focus on the community and societal functions as opposed to the individuals. You'll get a larger return on investment, so to speak, down the stretch. In research, we have been, it's been shown for a long period of time, really since the 70s, that early initiation of various types of drug use, tobacco and alcohol usually be the predecessors to other use among youth, is likely to escalate into serious addiction or substance use and abuse problems. So there is a lot of value in delaying the onset as long as possible. And we will acquire a lot by delaying the onset of, let's say, 2 years. Not only are we delaying the onset of 2 years in absolute terms, but we are delaying, or we are working towards the population on average having 2 years increase in brain development, for example, and 2 years increase in social development, and 2 years increase in social identity formation, and so on. All factors that are important for future development for kids. Now, obviously, if we can prevent a sizable chunk of our kids initiating early, we will prevent a lot of associated factors that come along with drug use problems, such as family and community breakdown, institutional costs, such as from law enforcement, the judicial system, hospitalization, healthcare, time of work away from work or work productivity, not only for the users themselves, but of course for their families and loved ones too. And studies tend to show, various different, or cost-benefit studies tend to show various different outputs for return on investment, but they're all quite sizable and positive. Some of them have shown for every $1 invested in primary prevention or upstream prevention, you get $4 in return. And I found studies that have actually found about $18 on return on investment for each dollar. So, a very large return there. So let me give you just an example of primary prevention from a holistic point of view and why that is important. This is just an individually fabricated example, but it will give you really a way to see how this tends to work. So let's consider two kids. One of them lives in a deprived area with relatively high crime rates. Parents are separated, mother works 2 minimum wage jobs to make ends meet. This kid attends a chronically underperforming and underfunded public school. Their peers are commonly subject to substance abuse at home. And this individual has limited opportunity for participation in organized recreational and extracurricular activities at school and in the community. Youth number 2 lives in a middle-class area with low crime rates. Parents are cohabitating, both full-time working professionals. The individual attends an average performing and average funded public school. Peers are unlikely to be subject to substance abuse at home, and this one has opportunities for participation in a variety of organized recreational and extracurricular activities. So the question is, which one would be more likely to initiate drug use? And almost everybody would point to the youth number one. The message of the story is this: there is nothing, absolutely nothing in this list and this framework or a sample profile that is attributed to the individual. It has everything to do with what kind of environment they come from. And this is actually what research shows repeatedly and consistently. Kids that come from deprived areas that are more likely to come from disrupted families or families that are not in normal cohabitation, at the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum, lower funding in terms of schools, and have limited opportunities for pro-social development of various kinds, such as organized recreational activities, they are much more likely to initiate drug use. Now, the individual approach here, the approach that we should just teach individuals to shy away from drugs, that approach disregards all this contextual stuff. It basically says, well, all that doesn't matter. You just have to teach kids that drugs are bad and shy away from them. And this is where the sort of non-logic comes into place, that this is not what research actually shows. Research shows that kids that come from that kind of background disproportionately are much more likely to initiate drug use. And it's because of the environment they come from, not because they are individuals that make bad choices. So when we move into discussing really how we can mitigate substance use onset, because we have now become convinced that the onset is the problem, that delaying the onset is the goal, we need to go beyond the typical individual ways of defining causes of substance use in youth. The common individual causes in terms of this viewpoint are things like lack of purpose or boredom or depressed affect or low school engagement or poor choices. But there is a different way to look at this, which is much more upstream, and that is to look at something called the causes of the causes, which is a public health term. And the causes of the causes are really what causes those typical individual causes. And those are those social and environmental risk factors that are systematic and systemic and really based in their lack of opportunity and where they live. That is what we need to be working on. So the isolating prevention model views individuals as product of those 4 major domains confined in the local school community. So individuals are supposed to be attributed by those 4 major domains of parents and family, the peer group, the school environment, and their leisure time or their free time. And kids spend 90+% of their time confined in their local school community. So if we really strive to work on risk and protective factors within those 4 major domains, and we set policies at the municipal level that really support local school community development and opportunities, we have a way of truly bringing down drug use onset, which then reduces the odds of drug use problems as kids become older. And this is really what Iceland did at a systematic country-based level and started in the late 90s. And has since then been shown to have reduced substance use among youth more than everywhere else. And as you can see, there is nothing about drugs in this figure. This figure is about community building, strengthening risk factors, strengthening protective factors, driving down risk factors within the immediate environment for our kids. So as a matter of a routine surveillance surveys, Iceland tends to track their kids quite well over time. This is a trend analysis or a trend figure that shows three sort of core typical substance use measures from 1998 to 2019. And these are repeated samples, so it's always 10th graders every year. These are actually population-based samples, so they include basically more or less all the 10th graders in the country. In 1998, 42% of our kids had become drunk in the past month, at least once in the past month. That ratio was 6% in 2019. In 1998, 23% were daily tobacco users. That frequency or prevalence was 1% in 2019. And 17% had used cannabis substances such as marijuana once or more often in their life, and that was 6%. Interestingly, if you look at the sort of bracket around 2011-12, that's where we have been able to, that's when we really came to this conclusion about in our reduction, and we've been able to maintain that prevalence since. So we created this systems change that now has strengthened protective factors and driven down risk factors at the community level. And as a result, there are way fewer kids choosing to use drugs in any community. And that's been a consistent application since about 2012, even though they're totally different kids than 10 years prior. One other thing that I want to show you just before I close here, and that is the anticipated change in drug use treatment rate as a result of this work. Now, remember, this figure doesn't have anything to do with drug use. This is simply about building strong communities where individuals thrive. Now, this figure is taken from the annual report of SAA in 2016. SAA is the largest treatment center in the city of Reykjavik, which is really the only city in Iceland. And what you see there are ratios of people coming to drug treatment as a portion or a function, portion of the population for males and females. For the 1982 cohort, which were 20 years old, which were 20 years old in 2002. 5.7% had been to drug treatment once or more often. For the 95 cohort that were 20 years old in 2015, the yellow line are men or young men, 20 years and younger, or younger than 20 actually. That ratio was 2.6%. So we have basically halved or more than halved the need for drug treatment, which is the most expensive and least effective way of preventing substance use at the population level. Now, remembering that the approach taken in Iceland has nothing to do with drugs, it has to do with building communities so that we can delay the onset of drug use. But this is what has followed along with that at the population level. And with that, I close my talk. Thank you very much. I have one question that I just wanted to address because it's kind of relevant and kind of common. It's a question of what about the vaping statistics? And very good question. We have certainly had our influx of vaping, as most other countries, at least Western countries, have had. For a period of time, we had a very large increase, which was very similar to what happened in other countries. And now we have seen a very considerable reduction. But that change, for those that are advocating for vaping as a way to stop smoking, that change didn't take place until after we saw most of our reduction in tobacco use. So for us, vaping is not a way to reduce smoking. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think I've seen those stats before, but it's really quite phenomenal to see the impact and the decrease that was able to happen over time. So I think definitely that study just shows the value of prevention. So thank you so much for that. So for our last panelist for this evening, we're going to go to the local community. So we have Janice Ouellette, who is, as I mentioned, a member of our Crime Prevention Council. I'm sure that's the first thing that you put up whenever you introduce yourself, right? That's the most important aspect. But I will give the broader definition of what you do beyond just Crime Prevention Council. So Janice has a Master's of Social Work and Community Development from Wilfrid Laurier University, and has passionately worked in the area of children and youth and community capacity building for 25 years. She started her community work at ROOF, a local organization supporting homeless youth and youth at risk of being homeless. She learned massive lessons of resilience and power of relationships from the young people and volunteers and staff that she met at ROOF, and moved on to the municipality of the city of Kitchener, looking for a way to go upstream, address barriers to access and opportunity, and build possibilities. As a supervisor of children and youth services, Janice and her team of children and youth programmers engage young people to build connection, impact, their sense of belonging, problem-solving skills, resiliency, confidence, and teamwork skills. And my personal note in talking to Janice about the work, what I really love is that it's a bit of an example of sort of what I would call day-to-day work, where they're building this sort of sneaking in, oh, and I'm not going to steal your famous quote, but sneaking in kind of the concept of upstream into kind of sort of day-to-day stuff. So I think it's a really excellent example of the blend of all the worlds. So with that, I will pass it over to Janice. And there are some questions coming into Q&A. That's great. Some of the panelists are grabbing them as we go, which is awesome. But keep them going, and we'll have a brief break after Janice, and we'll answer even more questions then.
Thanks for that, Deb. Yes, my name is Janice. I'm the supervisor of children and youth services with the city of Kitchener. I go by she, her pronouns, and my family are settlers on this land. I'm going to talk a little bit about how the city of Kitchener uses recreation and positive youth development to help improve youth well-being in our community. As Deb mentioned, I started off, my first job out of school was at the Roof Agency, where we worked with homeless youth. And it's interesting that Lana brought up the quote from Gloria Steinem, because that was something that really was always something that stuck with me when I felt like this wasn't my place of work didn't feel the right place for me in the work world, because I felt like I was constantly, and I appreciate the frontline workers to no end. I think that they're obviously of value, and we know that they're needed, but it made me crazy it was a constantly young people struggling and in the river, needing support. And I wanted to go further upstream and support young folks before they ended up in the river, and figure out why they were ending up in the river and trying to make some changes there. So what I want to talk a little bit about is actually the power of play. I think it's not any news to anybody that recreation, being active, getting out, moving, has a positive impact on our health, on our physical well-being. And it's unlikely, I'm going to guess, that anybody here who has ever participated in sports or rec and leisure activities would need to be convinced that play can have an impact on your beyond physical well-being. Play has a power beyond just helping us get healthy physically. I think instinctually and anecdotally, we know that play can positively impact both our social well-being as well and our emotional well-being. We see kids learn through play. They learn about making decisions. They learn about planning proactively, developing problem-solving skills. They negotiate and connect and build friendships. They learn about communication and teamwork. They explore those strategies for resolving conflicts. They learn what it means to act fairly. And they try new things. They take positive risks and build self-confidence, build a further understanding of who they are. And as children experiment with those successes and failures, they learn to trust themselves, and sometimes they learn to trust others too. So by trying out new things, and it's our job to help them try out new things, they learn about that effect that they can have both on themselves and on others, and even the world that's around them. And so what we've seen, and the research shows, is that the sooner kids learn their effect on the world, the sooner they'll be able to be that type of person who doesn't take up the whole sidewalk, or when another person approaches, or someone who stands up for a person who's being discriminated against, and even simply being the type of person that takes that extra second before speaking to consider what other people might think or feel. So play has a huge power to help us learn. And as Mr. Rogers once said, play gives children a chance to practice what they are learning. So all of this leads to this building of capacity and resiliency that they need to face future challenges. There's plenty of research across countries that provide evidence of this interplay of leisure, social capital, and health. And one of the frameworks that we make use of at the City of Kitchener, especially when we're teaching our young staff who are supporting our programs, is the 40 Developmental Asset Framework, as well as the developmental relationships. So the Search Institute has conducted extensive research that helps us understand what young people need to thrive. They have categorized 40 experiences and qualities that influence young people's development and helping them become caring, responsible, and productive adults. So there's 40 areas where we can have an impact on young people. Over time, studies of more than 5 million young people consistently showed that the more assets that young people feel that they have, the less likely they are to engage in a wide range of high-risk behaviors, and the more likely they are to thrive. So the more likely, if they have more assets, the more likely they are to do well in school, be civically engaged, value diversity, and the less likely, as Alfgeir was mentioning, to engage in risky behavior like alcohol use, drug use, and violence and sexual activity too. And there are other studies that demonstrate how recreation itself impacts assets, recreation specifically, and helps us build our capacity and resilience. So when participation in recreation is focused on increasing self-esteem and self-concept, research has shown that delinquency from school was reduced. Children who participate in recreational leisure activities develop and improve their learning skills, which directly impacts their school performance. And the more active and engaged a young person is in sports and recreation and the arts, the less likely they are to be stressed, suffer depression, or turn to self-destructive behaviors like smoking and drinking and fighting and vandalism and drug abuse and even suicide. So research shows that recreation promotes that positive interaction with young people. It also gives them an opportunity to have contact with different groups of people. We don't choose who we recreate with all the time, and so we have the opportunity to meet different people from different backgrounds, and it can promote positive communication in a non-threatening environment. We're all focused on a common goal in a recreation activity, and this can help break down some of those barriers of unfamiliarity and maybe fear, and help improve trust and acceptance of others. So there's lots of ways that recreation can have a positive impact. The asset framework really clearly shows through all their research that youth who have higher levels of developmental assets are much less likely to engage in a wide range of high-risk behaviors that are mentioned there. So if you have, self-report that you have 0 to 10 assets out of the 40, you are more likely to engage in high-risk behavior than someone who feels that they have 31 to 40 of those assets. And the assets include things like self-esteem, positive self-concept, constructive use of time, positive adult role models. So there's some internal and some external assets there that young people benefit from having. And the research also shows that youth who have those higher levels of developmental assets are much more likely to engage in thriving behaviors. So if you have 31 to 40 assets, you're more likely to succeed in school, help others, value diversity, maintain good health, exhibit leadership, resist danger, and overcome adversity. The other thing that we focus on at the City of Kitchener with our training and our program is the focus on relationships. And just as a way of helping us understand this and helping teach our staff about this, the Search Institute has also identified 5 areas of relationship development. We train our staff to understand this power of play, but also their role in relationship development. We teach them about the power of developmental relationships that can help young people discover who they are. We help them try new things, as I mentioned, and develop new abilities to shape themselves in their own lives and contribute to the world around them. The staff are there to show young people that they care, to welcome them, to be interested in them, to listen to them. Staff are there to, they're taught how to recognize those learning opportunities, the teachable moments where they can challenge young people to reflect and problem solve, learn and grow. So the opportunity comes up in the middle of an activity or meeting or group, and their opportunity there is to say, why do you think you're going to be doing this? How is that going to affect the other people around you? And we're there to challenge them to grow and develop those interpersonal skills. And they do this always in a relationship of support, helping them navigate through tough conversations, setting clear expectations for them, and always hearing them out, always hearing them out. What's their take on a situation or a conflict? How might they suggest we move forward? What are they interested in doing? And the idea is that they show respect and give respect and give the young people a say in what they do. So our approach is to provide those opportunities for play, for fun, food, and friends, while staff take the advantage of teachable moments to challenge and help kids problem solve and reflect and grow. And we call that throwing the vegetables in with the dessert. We use this and intentional youth development and resiliency research and developmental relationships as a foundation for all of the programs that we provide for our young people in our, at the city. And through play and fun and food, we learn to they learn those leadership skills, the communication skills, the decision-making skills, and have a sense of belonging and connection. Some of the things that we actually have, programs that we run are focused on sports and recreation. We have summer camps and youth drop-in programs and basketball and a variety of different leisure-based, sometimes sports-based, sometimes arts-based programming. With the idea, again, that we're finding opportunities to teach young people how to, giving them opportunities to build friendships and belong and connect and have those positive adult role models in their lives. Another area that we do work in is with the Kitchener Youth Action Council, which is an advisory council. And this is an opportunity for the City of Kitchener to hear youth voices. So not only in our recreation programs do we ask young people what they're interested in and how they want to, what they want to have happen at our programs, what's important to them for programming. We also have an action council whose entire role is to share their voice with council and make sure the voices of young people in the community are heard. We focus a lot on leadership development. We have a program that we call the Building Youth Leadership Development Program, which is an opportunity for young people to gain some leadership development skills. It's sort of like a leader in training program that helps young people who are interested in moving up the ladder and getting into an actual leader position with us. We have a program that we call the Youth Forum. Back when we could actually be in person with each other, we would get young people from the schools to come in and basically tell council some ideas of what they think should happen in the community for young people. We've had our youth engagement audit, and certainly our youth leader training, where we cover all of these things. And then we provide employment for young people. So we are in the process of hiring for our summer. We're training for summer. We've hired 130 people, young people between the ages of 15 and 25, to help us run our programs. And they are, they learn and they lead and they develop their own skills and abilities and strengths to move forward. Part of the other things that we really focused on is inclusive programming and making sure that young people who have special needs are part of our programs. And that's something that we've seen has a huge impact too on the other participants, and teaches acceptance and understanding and perspective taking. And part of the sort of fallout, I guess, or opportunities that presented themselves through COVID was that we were able to start some other programs, virtual programs that focused on, besides leadership development, focused on gratitude. And how do we ensure that young people are understanding what they're grateful in themselves and in their family members and in their community, as well as a project what we call Heart of Hope, which is our focus for our summer programs this year, that focusing on how we have, what we can do to be caring and kind and compassionate and have empathy for others. Part of our guiding principles, besides the relationship focused and leadership development, is also, as I mentioned, the participatory side of things, where youth voice is extremely important, and where we do look at ways that we can find co-creation opportunities, places where youth can inform us, and a skill and an opportunity for all of our leaders is that whole idea of listening and making sure we're listening to young people and what they have to say. Some other systems changes that happen or that we try to address further upstream ideas is about the no cost or low cost. We know that recreation and leisure and after school opportunities are most effective if they're accessible and affordable. So that means that the more accessible and affordable they are, the more that they'll be accessed, which means the more likely that folks are able to develop some of those assets. So research shows that also that close proximity to facilities and to places for play are also associated with higher levels of participation. So the city works from a neighborhood-based model. We have 13 community centers across the city that engage volunteers and staff and partner organizations who program the space, making sure that there's programs, resources available at a neighborhood level. So easy to get to, easy to access. We're big on free or low cost, no cost programming. We also have a program called the Leisure Access Card, which helps families to access programs if there is a fee to them. And as I mentioned, we help support some virtual programming now with the COVID. We've really delved into that. And a big part of what we're trying to do is to provide youth employment as well. So how is all this primary prevention? Well, by providing access to recreation and leisure to all of the benefits that go with it, and by providing opportunities for young people to have leadership development, providing youth with a voice in decision-making, and by providing opportunities for employment. That includes really, really good training and opportunities to experience and learn and grow. We believe we're working to support and address some of those areas that Deb spoke about, the underlying parts of what it means to be upstream and affect overall well-being. We know that we have an impact on, and research is clear, and we've seen it anecdotally as well, that we have an impact on when we open the doors, community members get involved, it increases their confidence, their engagement, their overall health, both physical, mental, and emotional health. We work to increase a sense of belonging and a sense of that they have a place and can have an impact. And equity and inclusion are also huge parts of what we do, and educational success, et cetera. We know that there's upstream systems changes that we can certainly have an impact on, and would like to see more of an opportunity to advocate for and hope to make happen. Some of that includes universal access to recreation. We do have most of our programs are low cost or no cost, but we know that the protective primary prevention impact that recreation and youth engagement and leadership development can have upstream has to be accessible. And I mean that universal access to recreation is one of those things. We also know that decision-making should be more influenced by all members of our community, including those young voices. So we are advocating for a decision-making lens for council, but also foundations and funders that might help them know how to engage, how to assess, a funding application that says they're engaging young people. So maybe questions that they can ask a potential funding organization that they're going to fund, and what does that really mean? And we can help them understand what real good youth engagement means. And we know that we can increase awareness and communication strategies to actually put programs and resources, opportunities in front of young people. I think one of our biggest realizations is that not everybody knows about the stuff that we have available to them. And finally, adding to that, the caregiver and parental supports and connections. And I think Alfgeir talks really well about how all those structural pieces have an impact upstream and can make an impact on the young people's lives. So that's us at the City of Kitchener.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Janice. I think the part I was waiting for the most in your presentation was the piece about putting the vegetables in with the dessert. I just love that that description that you have. And I think kind of just the common theme across all three for sure is that resiliency and capacity building, and again, really kind of going upstream and trying to build capacity in people so that we can prevent the things from happening further downstream. So with that, we are going to take a brief 5-minute break just to give a quick bio break to yourselves and to the panelists, and then we're going to regroup. So please don't leave us and come back. And then we will answer some of the questions that you have. So feel free to pop some stuff into the Q&A. We've got a couple of questions here that we'll deal with when we come back. All right, everyone. Well, welcome back. So I'll have the panelists join me, and we've got a few questions coming in through the chat. So we'll just take a moment, take a little bit of time to answer that. So we have just over 20 minutes left for the evening. So we'll keep answering those questions and get to as many as we can. Okay, so looking at the Q&A coming in, Janice, there's actually a couple for you. So I might start with one and send it over your way. And the first question I'm looking at here is organizational structure. So just wanting to know, so Cindy is wanting to know whether you work in the Recreation Services Department or if you're embedded within community development.
So our municipality has a department called Community Services. Within that department, we have a division called Neighborhood and Program and Resource Services. They just changed the name. And the area that I work in is a subsection of that, neighborhood and program and resource services, which is called program resource services. So the structure, we do have community development within our division. We have a neighborhood development office. We have a community, what we call the community center division, which is the folks who manage those multiple community centers that I mentioned across the city. We have real neighborhood level community centers. And then we have folks in my particular section, our division, are those who work at a more, let's say, population sort of standpoint. So we have folks who work with inclusion. We have folks who work with older adults. We have myself and my team who works with children and youth. And so, yeah, it's all part of that one division.
Awesome, thank you. And I think what I might also do, there were actually a couple of questions that came in that Lana and Alfgeir had responded to through text. For the sake of the recording, and also just to see if there was anything you wanted to add to that, I might go back to some of those questions just to make sure that we've got that as well. So Lana, there had been a question for yourself about responding to somebody who asked directly for assistance, whether you had a list of resources to refer them to or if you followed up at all with individuals. So you did provide an answer, but I just thought I'd give you a chance to repeat that or expand on that.
Sure. We get contacted a lot through our website, but rarely, I think once you go to our website and you see the work that we do, we don't do direct services. So we do have a listing of services available, not just in Calgary, but Alberta wide, and we'll always send out those resources as well.
Excellent. We get the same thing at Crime Prevention Council, and we don't necessarily provide direct service, but sometimes people will try to contact us for information. Excellent. So Alfgeir, the other question was around, for yourself, was around, notwithstanding the treatment data, do you know if the 15-year-olds youth maintained their low rates of substance use in later years? And speaking again about the outcomes in other domains such as crime, victimization, health, etc.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, the cohort, as we follow them up through high school, and well, the system is a little different in Iceland. Our high schools end in 10th grade, and then they move into junior colleges before they go to college if they take that route. But we have seen a consecutive reduction over this period of time. And in fact, we'd like to think that the Icelandic national football team that has done well, given that they're from an island of 370,000 people. They are actually kids that have lived through this whole, systems change. Other measures that we have found to positively be impacted are things like delinquency. We see quite a large reduction in bullying behaviors. But then again, and of course, the changes in impact variables or independent variables that we target based on the model. And those have to do with things like parental monitoring and obviously opportunities for leisure time activities, including sports and other activities. But there are also things that we have not seen change, or even things that we have seen change in line with international trends. For example, anxiety appears to be on the rise universally, particularly in girls. Obviously, fashion, social media, screen time, all these things have changed a lot in our lives over the last decade and a half or so. And we are part of those trends too. So, some of them clearly attributable to our work, others less so, and some have not changed in that direction.
Excellent. Thanks very much. That was helpful. There's an interesting question that just came in. So I'm actually thinking of going to that because it's actually looking to both Janice and Lana to provide some insight. And so the question is that about the culture of sports. So while Janice has pointed to the fact that being involved in sports certainly helps with a lot of the developmental assets of building skills and building capacity and leadership, but there's also an aspect of the culture of sports that can be negative and perpetuates violent forms of masculinity and contributes to the deep roots of relationship violence. So, and they reference a book called Citadels of Pride. So just wondering, the question was just wondering if Janice and Lana can discuss any interventions they know of that address some of the harmful aspects of traditional sports. And yeah, I was going to say, I'll leave it to you guys to decide who. For Jenny, you've got your mic off, so I'm assuming you want to chime in.
Oh no, I just had it off already.
Okay, no worries then.
I'm reading the question. I'm a visual learner.
Okay, sure. Lana, did you have a comment?
Sure, I can jump in there because and I think I'm just going to look up Citadels of Pride. So thank you for that resource. I'm just looking it up right now. Yeah, so I would say in 2013, we conducted some research with White Ribbon Canada and started to really recognize the importance of settings, which I think was the precursor to us designing a guidebook or a practitioner's guide to changing contexts. Because we had seen certain masculinity show up in certain environments that reinforce sometimes unhealthy behaviors and attitudes. And so we happen to go into policing versus a sports setting, but I would love to go into a sporting setting, particularly because I do live in Canmore, Alberta, which is a high, hyper-masculine, competitive culture and community. I think we have the highest rates of, Olympic athletes, and there is a lot of pressure here in terms of sports and that culture and competitiveness. And I do have friends who do work in that area, but I haven't studied enough to kind of unpack for you, because we know in policing, there's contest masculinities and all these different forms of masculinities that show up in different environments. And in sports, what does that look like? How is it harmful? And then what can we do in sporting settings to actually try to express healthy forms of masculinity? And so I haven't worked in enough sporting settings to actually unpack some of that, but I do feel the connection between hypermasculinity, hegemonic masculinity, and the environments actually can reinforce unhealthy behaviors to oneself. And I know, because I work with a lot of men who come from the sporting world, who have a lot of mental health issues as a result, and a lot of pressure, internal pressure. And so I think it is a really important area. I'll look at this book, but if you want to dig into policing or technology, those are the sectors that I've spent some time really digging into.
I don't think I have a lot to add. I think that probably mostly because my area is recreation and leisure, and it's not competitive sports. That's a separate area in the corporation that I don't have a ton of connection with. But what I do know is that there's lots of coaching, training programs that they're working on, that they're developing to address some of those issues, focusing on how the coaches lead and challenge and support those folks that are in the competitive sports arenas. Not saying that that doesn't happen in recreation, but because it's a little less competitive there's a lot more opportunity to just stop play and address it. And I know that it's probably a more serious issue in the competitive sport arena, and I know that they're working at developing programs and training programs particularly for coaches and families around that.
Yeah, I think Jackson Katz does a lot, Mentors in Violence, and there's a lot of research on his approach, and especially around bystander within that. But that again is like an individual intervening with another individual. It's not changing the systems or culture of sport. And I think I think he's working on that area as well. So I think that would be something. And I know some national organizations that, if you know Next Gen Men, which is a national organization, they've done some work in sporting environments as well.
That's a great resource then for somebody to follow up a bit more. Yeah, it certainly seems like an area that could be worth exploring. Mm-hmm. Okay. Excellent. So another question that had come through was around a book that somebody else has. So the question from Jenny is, looking at prevention instead of intervention is a way that we really need for genuine change. Has anyone ever read The Wealthy Banker's Wife? And what did you think of it if you have?
I haven't read it. Sorry.
We know.
We can't help Jenny.
Yeah, sorry if they have other comments to put in. What did they feel that what we were talking about in the book, what was the relationship with?
Yeah, so I'm wondering, I mean, so the initial part of the question was looking at prevention instead of intervention is a way that we really need for real and genuine change. So I think really that's obviously the whole focus of this session, which is, yeah, that upstream prevention versus intervention after the fact. So I guess, Jenny, we're going to have to say, unless you have sort of a follow-up question, maybe we all got to go away and do some more homework there, but but it would be interesting to see if there was a specific element of that book that you were wanting to draw out. Okay. So we
sorry,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, because I was just reflecting on the costing studies that the other presenter, Alfgeir, talked about, and just we had done a costing study early on to build a business case for primary prevention here in Alberta. And it was a $1 to $20 ratio, especially investing in maternal health and supports early on, and not just working obviously with the mother, but with the co-parent. And just there are certain evidence-based areas to be investing in that actually show great impact upstream that does reduce both intimate partner violence and other forms of harm.
There you go. So Jenny did put a follow-up comment, and that was exactly it. So that was also a question I had in my back pocket, because I know that's the, I'll say, $1 million question, is that prevention doesn't always, show up immediately with effects. So trying to, encourage funding toward upstream prevention can sometimes be hard. So it's great when studies like Alfgeir's can show the cost benefit. And Lana, I was going to ask, so you do have as well. So yeah, so it seems like that's the, so I'm not sure if any of you wanted to comment on that as well, but just about that, the cost or the cost savings of prevention.
Yeah, I think it's one of more, politics, as was mentioned earlier by the other presenter, and just depending on the party you have in at the time and what their values are and how you can formulate that argument as well matters. But we know for us, we did business cases, costing studies, and the other issue, I think it's hard to prove sometimes, primary prevention. And so that's another issue. I would say with the pandemic, the metaphor of what's happening now and recognizing that if we had a better disaster planning, if we had more money put in, I think people are starting to, I think that argument, I think you can start to, I think more people in the public sphere are starting to understand that. So I think it is one to think about in moving forward with the stories and metaphors. And I think earlier today, you used it as an example to get that audit that you're designing and building. And I do think people can understand prevention more now, just in a public discourse way than even 5 years ago.
Yeah. Alfgeir, did you want to jump in on
that? This issue and discussion around cost effectiveness and cost benefit is always very relevant because of the sort of downstream implications from politics through our institutions and the way our societal systems are set up. If you sort of scrutinize cost benefit studies and cost effectiveness studies, there's a massive approximation going on, in most of them, because it's just the way that you have to try to guess a lot of things to create that one output. But I think those studies are especially important for upstream prevention and upstream thinking, because upstream thinking and primary prevention tends to be focused on holistic systems changes. And if we are going to get anywhere with holistic systems changes, we really need our elected officials at the table. And they love these kind of patent responses. You get so many dollars in, so many dollars out. So for those reasons, they're very important in terms of creating this sort of community engagement focus with our elected officials, even though they're not necessarily the greatest quality research, if you will. So it has a lot of implications for practice, and that's why I think they are very important, particularly for upstream and systems-based thinking.
So Lana, we did put into the chat your website. So if somebody did want to follow up with you on some of that costing that you've got, and Alfgeir had provided some estimates that you had seen earlier, but Janice, did you, I'm not sure in your nature of your work if you've kind of got any costing information about benefits. And
I think Alfgeir's right when his quote or stats that he put was 1 to 4 or 1 to 18. I think our measurement ends up being around 1 to 7, 1 to 10, $1 intervention or prevention saves $10, $7 to $10 in intervention. But like he said, it is a massive estimation.
Yeah,
lots of hard things to prove. There's relational influences, but whether or not it's a causal effect is it's hard to prove what doesn't happen, right?
Yeah,
it's interesting because I'm building a case right now for not just Calgary Police, but Alberta, that we're reforming the Police Act right now. And we're looking specifically around sexual harassment below the criminal threshold. And there's a costing study that was done in Australia. And I was looking at their methods to the point, like lots of assumptions, how you define stuff. And it was done by Deloitte in Australia in terms of workplace harassment and costs in Australia across organizations. But what I found interesting in there, and what I find interesting in costing studies, they have to define specific behaviors, and they define it better than most people in our sector. And so I find the variables that they created, how they defined even, and how they ended up costing is actually going to be very helpful here in Canada to be able to either replicate the method or at least borrow some of the ideas that they've done some deep thinking on. What is it? What is the outcome? What is work productivity? Because when you experience sexual harassment in the workplace, often you're obviously isolated, you go off work. Sometimes it takes 2 to 3 years to resolve the issue. It doesn't get resolved in a way that actually supports the victim often victims leave before the bully, we know, in the workplace. And so understanding that there's huge costs to organization. And I think that becomes where the private sector steps in sometimes faster than government on some of these issues, because they start to realize that it impacts their bottom line.
Right. Yep. Yeah. Excellent. Well, you know what? We've got about 4 minutes left, and we have one more question in here, and it's actually from another council member, but a really important question. So, Janice, it's actually directed to yourself, but I think the rest of you may also have a take on this. And it's really about, so in Janice's case, about putting opportunities in front of youth. So at present, youth in low-income neighborhoods, racialized youth, and others have many fewer of these kinds of opportunities. How can communities address this opportunity gap between these youth and the youth from more privileged backgrounds? So I suspect there's an underlying thread probably in each of your work related to that. So I don't know, Janice, if you want to start, and then if either Lana or Alfgeir have something to comment.
Sure. Where my thoughts go to for that question, Mark, is that the gap isn't about the opportunities so much as a lot of times about the knowledge about the opportunities and the support to get those folks to those opportunities. So where what I'd love to see some more work done and time and energy and money, I guess, invested in is supporting parents, for starters, to helping parents have the tools and resources they need to help their young people, but also adding those tools and technology for improving communications. We are in a smart region with lots of tech in this area. There's opportunities there that we can make use of to help get the information in front of people and get technology in front of people, because that's probably the biggest issue is for those with the opportunity gap. It's not having access to the technology and those sorts of tools. So a couple of thoughts there.
Do Lana or Alfgeir, do you have any, in your context, is there sort of any nuances, maybe not opportunity gap, but certainly with advantage and those who sort of have opportunities and those who don't, and how that may show up differently in your work?
You know, there is a distinction in there about access and opportunity, which is really class division, which is really, really hard to break. And we see this time and time again. For us, it really boils down to how able are we to integrate community engagement into our programming, because I can go down to communities that I don't live in and I don't know anybody, and I can talk until I'm blue in the face and nobody's going to do anything. I get somebody hired that actually lives within the community and creates a link to local people that already has the local trust, the local know-how, and the local understanding. I'm playing a totally different game now. And so what we have learned is that in our approaches to trying to make structural changes at the community level, we really have to have local hands at the table. And that's what we are really emphasizing now, both with leisure time programming, parental programming, and other things of that nature.
Excellent. Lana, did you have?
Yeah, just the same. And I think we're applying an informal support, a key influencer approach, where we're working with people within the community who have that, I think, to the point, the capital and connections, and then supporting through technology. So we're just designing and testing a behavioral insights approach to that. And we'll know more in like a year or two once we've implemented it. So happy to come back in a few years to talk about the learning.
Excellent. Yeah, the behavioral insights and the nudge approaches that you referred to too, I think that got some interest, and I think that's a really intriguing line of study is those, behavioral insights. And I think the even Janice, in your talk, you had talked about co-design being important, and I think the more the youth engagement and the more, and there was a comment here that came in on the questions that relationship being extremely important. So.
And I really like what you're saying, Alfgeir, because you can ask the folks who come through the door what they want, but how do you get those folks who don't come through the door? And that's key, is having those key informants, people from within the community being part of your plans, and you're connecting with others and engagement for sure.
Yeah. Well, it is 8:31. I think there have been some excellent questions. I think there have been great presentations. I really appreciate each of you for taking your time. I know you're all very busy, and Janice is in the midst of launching all her summer programs this week, and Alfgeir and Lana with all of your work ongoing. So thank you so much, though, for taking the time this evening. I think it's been really worthwhile. Certainly Upstream thinking is something we're passionate about here at CPC, and it's great to kind of see really concrete examples that folks are working on. And some of the structural systemic level pieces is just really exciting to kind of open our eyes as to what's possible. So maybe some follow-up conversations might come out of this, but really appreciate your time. I have to give a huge thank you to the, we call them the Zoom team behind the scenes. So Abby and Julie, who are helping keeping all of this going and making it all look so pretty. And to Mariana and Shama and Michael as well on the team for all the work that the entire team has put into this entire speaker series. So this is our last one. We all might be a little relieved after this evening. It's been a lot of work, but really great thought-provoking conversations. And we're quite energized and exhausted by all of it. So anyway, thank you everybody very much. And so to all the attendees, we appreciate you spending some time with us this evening. Panelists, if you want to stick around, we can chat about it. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.